Hello and welcome to the Double Pivot, the world's most agreeable soccer analytics podcast. I am Michael Cayley. We are through 2 weeks of the Premier League season, so we were sitting around saying, okay, we'll talk about some games, and we'll say, here's some interesting stuff going on, but fundamentally it's been 180 minutes of football. Don't freak out, calm down, wait and see. And we thought that's not going to be the most exciting pod, but it's our thing, it's our statistical thing. And then the news came down like a deluge this morning. And you know what? We can just say, are you worried about your team? Are you excited about your team? Pump the brakes. It's only been 180 minutes, and we're going to talk about the news. Joined by Mike Goodman. Ready to talk about money and strikers?
Let's do it. The music you heard on the way in is the Whalers. Max is not with us on the other side of the virtual glass. Everything happened today. Let's talk about it. Oh, download, subscribe, patreon.com/doublepivot, blah, 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 blah. Harry Kane, Kylian Mbappe, Cristiano Ronaldo. Where do we want to start here?
So I feel like we should go from the most solid news to the least solid news.
Okay.
So the Kane thing is settled.
He's staying this window. This window.
His language is very, very clear in his official tweet, clearly vetted by his PR agency he's reportedly hired after his brother didn't do a great job managing that. It says, I am staying with Tottenham this summer.
Right.
And there's no report of a new contract. He'll have 2 years left on his contract next summer. So what this seems to be is a sort of kicking the can down the road kind of move rather than a permanent move. And so the risk and reward should be understood in that context.
Yeah. Look, I don't know what I think. I always thought that if Spurs could get 100, let alone 150 for him, you do that deal. Quite clearly. But part of the reason I thought that was that I didn't really think a year from now that they'd be able to get 100, 150 for him. So if the deal for Spurs here is we are standing firm for this window and we will revisit next window, as they have done successfully before, right? That's what they did with Gareth Bale for a year. That's what they did with Luka Modric for a year. With both of those deals, they managed to kick it down the road a year, still get more money the next year, and also ship them out of the Premier League. All of that working out with Kane at 28 seems harder to me. A lot harder.
Yeah, I think the Modric deal is the clear sort of antecedent in that they turned down a similar amount of money from Chelsea, held on. Modric even sat out, actively, no, attempt to say, no, I didn't sit out, ha, ha, ha. He was yeah, I was sitting out, I wanted to go to Chelsea. But then they said, no, you'll come back, we'll sell you next summer, and they did, and they got a bunch of money for him. But the difference, as you're saying, is that Luka Modric at the time was 25.
Right. It's a huge difference.
And 24 when they held on to him. And so he still had his peak basically left to go. And Kane is on the end of his peak. So the risk that Spurs are eating here is that Kane has a bad season, a sort of, a regression season. Maybe all of that shot creation there's a bit of air in it. He comes back down, or he gets hurt again. And then the other risk that they're eating is that maybe the big market for older strikers this summer, with big bids being lodged for Kane and Lukaku going for 100 million as well, is going to dry up next summer when Haaland is on the market and when maybe Isak is. Who knows what the market looks like next summer. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's only so many teams that can pay a lot of money for a striker. So Spurs are eating those two pieces of risk in exchange for getting Harry Kane this season. And that's a big bet on Tottenham this season, that you get some upside. The betting markets have Spurs if you sort of do the math out and take away the VIG, something like 4-1, I think, for top four. 538 is a little bit higher than that. It's possible. Weirder things have happened. But, you're making a bet on that upside.
And you'd expect those odds to improve for Spurs a little bit now, because to a certain degree, the bookies, if not 538, are baking in the chances of Kane leaving, which now go to zero, or virtually zero. I don't know. Like, my thing about this for Spurs is that the Bale market and the Modric market, as the two marquee sales that they've done in sort of the last, recentish memory, 10 years, were all like robust markets for the player. It was a superstar player that everybody wanted. Now, Kane is a superstar, but at 28, coming off injuries, the market felt, and given where like the international European market is now, like the market felt much more like Pep Guardiola decided he wanted Harry Kane, and that's where the valuation came from, rather than lots of people want Harry Kane. And if Pep Guardiola next summer is not as interested in Harry Kane, which is kind of what I would expect, to be honest, I'm not sure what happens to the market, with one caveat. And that caveat is PSG. Because there's a guy at PSG who really likes Harry Kane, and PSG might be in the market for a striker. And, yes, Erling Haaland is out there, and he'll go somewhere, we all assume, because he's got a buyout clause for a lot of money, and obviously PSG will be interested. But, I sort of think, if I'm trying to make sense of this from a Spurs perspective, that the possibility of PSG as an outlet here to run the same play that they used to run with Real Madrid is what makes you think maybe they will, nevertheless wriggle out of this and be able to sell Kane.
Yeah, and I think the key thing here is that it really is about 2022 looking at selling him. That seems very clearly to be what all of the statements point toward. And so I don't know if it's going to pay off.
It doesn't seem
I think
a
that
good
the
bet.
issue for me, the issue for me is less the risk. I think that it's not unreasonable to think that, PSG is out there, City are reasonably likely to come back, United are going to need a striker next summer, and probably more likely to be liquid. Weirder things have happened than Kane having a big market next summer. The issue is, what is the upside that Spurs are buying in exchange for taking on this risk? And that's where I struggle to see the expected value on the bet, because what they've probably done is built themselves into a good Europa League team, rather than into a team that's going to challenge for the Champions League, into a team that's going to win that trophy that Spurs obviously, desperately want. Maybe they do. Maybe it works out. Weirder things have happened. You can get lucky. But, I just don't think they're buying that much upside in the context of the Premier League in 2021, 2022. That's the issue to me.
No, I agree with that 100%. I don't... You're not getting, this only makes sense to me if you think you're getting more money or equivalent money next year. And I have a hard time seeing that.
Now, I do think that one very possible outcome is that Spurs finish 5th or 6th and don't win a trophy, and then sell Kane for, $100 million next summer. And so it worked out fine, but you didn't actually buy yourself anything because you didn't get the upside.
Yes. I think that is correct. I also, think that there's a chunk of time where they, just don't. They end up with Kane for perpetuity, and, next summer, there isn't much of a market, and Kane signs an extension. And it's not even a great extension for Kane, because he doesn't have a ton of leverage. And Spurs are okay with that, and you just have Kane, and, that's fine, but in 2, 3, 4 years, your team will be worse for not having taken the money now.
Exactly. And I think that one of the things that leads into, which is I think one of the themes here, is just how much money does Tottenham have? The reason that super teams can just hang on to players with their peaks and then just let them go eventually and not make a transfer fee is because their revenues are so large that they can like swing that over time a few times and just balance it out. And everyone just assumes that is not the case with teams like Tottenham and Arsenal and so on. And I look at Arsenal's business since re-signing Aubameyang, and they just keep spending tons of money. They've cut their wage bill down by moving some players off, but they just keep spending tons of money. If they were spending it better, that would be better. But like, they seem to be able, it seems like they are able to manage not selling Aubameyang if they were buying better players to fill out the squad. Like, are these teams just really, really rich?
They are literally spending tons of money on players while also paying other players to go away. Like, they are probably the most aggressive club about paying wages to get want-away players off of their books. You know, starting with Ozil and moving towards your Socrateses and your Shade Kolasinac, and they're literally paying wages for these guys to leave. And I don't think those are bad decisions. They're being on those contracts in the first place are likely bad decisions. But yeah, I mean, and it's not right, like, just Arsenal here. Like, Burnley just made their club record signing from Lyon. Like, in Cornet, like, up and down the Premier League, these teams seem okay. Which is just vastly different from Europe.
Yeah, and just the lack of transparency into these teams' books, and, you know, to what degree is this that, like, you know, they're able to get favorable loan terms? To what degree are their revenues looking, you know, projecting very well this season? I don't know what's going on. But that context is really important for understanding all of these moves, because, you know, how much money is there? It's because Spurs, you know, are current. I mean, they're probably going to get some non-zero amount of money for guys like Winks or Sissoko or whatever. You know, Aurier maybe a little bit of money, but they're going to end up spending a ton of money on Romero and Brian, quite possibly a right back. You know, they might clear Ndombele's salary, but they're unlikely to get much of a fee. And if they do that, they'll probably have to replace him anyway. Like, they're looking at spending just a lot of money this offseason, and when they claimed coming into the offseason that they didn't have much money to spend.
There is a thing here, right, where, like, clubs that can spend right now should be spending, right? And yep. if you can actually, like to a real degree, if you can even pull forward some of your spending to this window, you should be doing that if you can swing it. If you have either the finances to do it yourself, if you can get loans to do it, like, because you have a sounder economic footing than other clubs, you should be doing that, because so many clubs need the money, right? And, like,
this appears to be exactly what Tottenham have done with Papa Matar Sarr.
That's exactly right. Yes, that would be exactly the example I would say. Right, where you just buy a young kid who projects very well, loan him back, and it's just like, well, you know, it is like, I guess what I would say is, if there was ever a time to found a loan army, it is this window.
Exactly. Just buy those kids, loan them out for a year, even 2 years, and, like, you've done your business in those years with these young players coming back from loan, or, you know, selling them off to finance new business, because you can get such good deals. It's clear that FC Metz just needed cash now. And so, you know, hurt for a star, call Papa Matar.
I mean, what's interesting to me here, though, is that, like, Chelsea have not done this. Chelsea have just done their normal thing where they, like, sell a bunch of assets that they have to counterbalance the spending they're doing, and they just don't spend that much. I mean, they spend a lot, but net, they don't, like, have that huge outlay. Where, like, they are a club where I would say, like, they could do it. I mean, to be fair, they did their huge outlay last year on the sort of same thought process, more or less. So maybe you don't double up. But, like, if Arsenal were spending better, they would be doing the right thing.
Chelsea are interesting because they are, to a certain degree, not economically constrained in some real way because they function to provide value to Roman Abramovich in softer ways than profits and revenue. But they are also clearly budgeted in a relatively clear way that, like, sometimes there's money to spend and sometimes there isn't, and they have a budget that they work with. And I think that this is interesting compared to the other news. And I think the other piece to mention here, though, before we move on to the other news, is City. Because City clearly, like, it's not unreasonable to say, I don't want to spend £160 million on Harry Kane this window. But also they are run by the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund. They could just, 160 million is rounding error. They could just do that. And they chose not to.
Yeah, look, I think City are run pretty well as these things go. And I think, like, City having all the money in the world, which they do, I think it's sometimes, like, interpreted as a weird misnomer. Because it's not that they just, like, spend obscenely on transfer fees these days, anyway. I think when they were trying to move up into the top four, that is more or less what they tried to do, and they threw sort of money around in some incredibly silly ways on the margins. But then really, like, sort of since Pep got there, and maybe really since Pellegrini got there, their transfer business is pricey, but not obscene. But I mean, the fact that they have all this money is reflected in how they run their business in a lot of ways. It's like, top of the line, it's the development facilities, it's the buying of other clubs, it's the building out of this network, it's all of this stuff, which is just like avenues that are not open to mere mortals in terms of how they run owning this club and this network of clubs. But, like, the transfer fees are not like, oh, we just always spend hundreds of millions every summer.
Exactly. And we got from Football Leaks a good amount of internal documents of how City are run. And what seems very clear is that they don't have just like an open pipeline of money. They had to make a bunch of requests for money, which they then had to make up, comically transparent lies about what the money really was when it was just getting money from Abu Dhabi. But they had to ask for it. They had a budget and they made requests over that budget. And that, I think, is the situation we see with City and Kane, which is that they were like, we'll give you this much money, but, like, that's our budget, that's our valuation. That they behaved like a team that has constraints because in a certain way they do, even if those constraints are not the same as the constraints of a team run by not run by a state.
Yes, which is interesting because now we're going to go over and talk about PSG, I think.
Who really just behave like a team run by a state without constraints. There was a member of the Qatari royal family, like, shitposting on Twitter.
Well, I mean, he shitposts a lot. Like, that's kind of that guy's thing. He does not really have, like, valuable local information, but he posts a lot. I mean, it is interesting because behind the scenes they are to some degree run like similar to City in terms of they have budgets, but it is different in terms of, like, what it looks like to run their club and what it looks like to make buying and selling decisions. They are much more willing to just splunk down a lot of money on this transfer or that transfer, or sell this player for a lot of money in this transfer and that transfer. The Neymar thing is obviously, like, the Neymar and buying Mbappe were both huge muscle flexes. But then you also just have all the secondary purchases they really do make. Sometimes, like Angel Di Maria was a really good one, and, like, Mauro Icardi was a really bad one. But, like, there's, like, PSG are more focused on buying names. They just are, like, as a means of getting good.
Yeah, and one of the things that they do a lot of player development and sell off players for, like, medium fees.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, not in a way that balances out their spending, but there is that side of it going on. Like, there's people who clearly running the club who really enjoy having their hand in player development, and they've done quite a bit of it. But I think that now the Mbappe offer from Real Madrid is, like, in some ways, PSG's response to this is even more of a flex than spending $200 million on Neymar. Like, saying we will turn down $160 million for a player who is due to leave on a free next summer just because we would feel humiliated if we accepted that money is wild.
When we're sitting here talking about this, Leonardo, the director of football at PSG, has said a bunch of stuff about the state of play. He is not conceding that they absolutely will not re-sign Kylian Mbappe. They want to. They maintain that they still want to. They are still trying to. He also said it seems clear that Mbappe wants to go to Real Madrid. Real Madrid wants Mbappe. And that... Look, Leonardo also didn't say we won't sell him. They just said we won't sell him for this piddling offer. Right? Like, and I don't know, maybe that's true. Maybe there is a number where they'll just be like, fine, take him. But clearly what it's being driven by is not like, I don't know. Well, like, it's much more like a fine art auction than anything else, than like a market. And I think we made this case with Neymar as well in the reverse when Barcelona and PSG were haggling over Neymar, is that when you get up way at this end of the sort of distorted extreme, where there's one buyer and one seller, like, it is a different, like, the order of operations are different.
The thing with PSG and Barcelona is that the buyer there was unconstrained, and so the seller had to, like, respond to a very different set of incentives and requirements. Here, what's really weird is Madrid having Madrid have cleared a lot of money. Their wage bill is in a pretty reasonable place for Real Madrid, and they have sold more than they've bought for since Hazard, basically. But 160 million and paying Mbappe, presumably a wage that he thinks is like his open market wage, that's a lot of money for a team that, very recently said that they were going to go broke if they couldn't found the Super League. I don't see how this adds up for Real Madrid.
Yeah, I mean, which is why Leonardo is out here saying that, like, what Madrid did was actually make a bid destined to fail so that they could tell Kylian Mbappe we tried. Man, I don't know. Like, I have no idea how to contextualize this, like, popping off with a week to go in the transfer market. Like, I just no idea.
Yeah, like, honestly, like, it's a kind of funny admission from PSG that, like, this is bound to fail, because it's crazy that it would fail. Like, Manchester City would take the money in this situation, I think. Like, it's wild that this would be bound to fail. But also, it being bound to fail is the thing that makes the most sense when you look at it from Real Madrid's perspective.
Yes, 100% yes. Like, cynically, I would say that, like, it is so silly to offer this much money for Kylian Mbappe 1 year before you're planning on signing him on a free that it must be just sort of not real messaging. Except for the fact that 2 years ago they did this, except for a considerably worse deal for Eden Hazard. Like, so I'm not convinced that it's, just posturing and positioning, because it wasn't then. And yes, it's incredibly bad financial practice to pay a lot of money for a guy who you can get on a free next year.
Yeah, I'm also very excited to see, like, if this doesn't go through and Kylian Mbappe becomes a free agent at, I think he'll be 23 next summer.
That's about right, yeah.
Like, you have a guy who easily could be, like, if you were to bet, like, who is the most likely player to be the best player in the world over the next 5 seasons, 2022 on, it would be Mbappe.
Yeah.
And so, there's never been a free agent like this in football since, money became like, since we got into a modern level of revenues. And there's not a team in the world, except maybe Chelsea, that shouldn't just spend all their money on him. United should spend all their money on him. City should spend all their money on him. Madrid will try to spend all their money on him. PSG will try to spend all their money on him. Like, he's in an amazing position. Now, it may be that he personally really wants to play for Madrid.
That seems to be the case.
And so Madrid will need to make a bid that is sufficient to what he wants rather than an open market bid. But, like, if I were running Manchester United, I would, like, ask around and find what Madrid were offering and say, well, we'll offer you 10% more than that and see what happens.
Yeah, no, absolutely you should. Although, like, it does seem like Manchester United are getting Erling Haaland, right? Like, it just kind of feels that way.
Yeah. I wonder if Bayern have a shot at him. And that would really throw the market into craziness.
One question is, does his buyout clause exclude Germany? Which I've never seen firmly answered. It might. In which case Bayern don't have a shot at him.
Yep. Yeah, one of those teams will get Haaland, but that leaves at least one or two others.
Yes. And again, Haaland has a big buyout clause, but like 75 million is not exorbitant when you're looking around here. And like, again, we're going to see a wage bidding war for him in a similar, and this is something that is fairly new to like the top end of professional soccer, and it's probably a good development, all things considered.
Yeah. Reportedly, that's what's going to happen with Pogba as well.
Right, because he's only got a year left. It will be very interesting to see, like, to some degree, all of this has been predicated on, like, COVID blowing up the market for 2 years. It'll be interesting to see if, like, a bunch of players look at whatever dollar figures Mbappe and Pogba and Haaland pull down and are like, oh, yeah, no, we should start doing that.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting sort of two like really totally unrelated things coming together, and I think Ashwin Raman was posting about this that the number of players moving on freeze has increased like tenfold in the last 5 to 8 seasons, and what this clearly suggests is that we have two things going on here. It's not. One is that teams really did run out of money, and so the transfer fees dried up, and players, were sort of forced to let their contracts run out. But also, I think that like players are over time clearly realizing that there is a massive hidden cost in contract extensions. That the contract extension gives the team that signs you the opportunity to pocket a bunch of the money that would otherwise be paid to you by the team that wants you. And so as players realize this, we're going to have pressure that makes it harder for teams to sell. And then on top of that, you get this brand new out of nowhere, totally exogenous pressure on teams to not that they don't have money because of COVID, because revenues disappeared. And those two things are then, I think this is going to like snowball. Like suddenly you have a much larger number of players leaving on freeze, including some headline players who are going to get headline wages. And more players are going to learn from that it's in their best interest not to take those contract extensions. And I think it could really, really change the football transfer market, the player market, the labor market in significant ways over the next few years.
One thing that it will often lead to, I imagine, is players signing big money contracts that don't work out for one reason or another, perhaps towards the end of their career, but not necessarily. And then teams needing to figure out ways to move those players, despite there not being necessarily very much interest in paying the size of the wage packet that they are then on. One might look toward Serie A and Juventus, where Cristiano Ronaldo seems like desperate to be anywhere else, but also like sort of resigned that he's just going to be at Juventus. And Juventus sort of feel like they'd be okay without Cristiano Ronaldo, but like nobody wants to pay Cristiano Ronaldo's salary.
Yeah, and so, what you would think about doing is like, Can you package another player with him? Can you package money for his salary on a loan? And this can be done. It happens very occasionally. But that's the kind of math that starts to happen in a world where player wages are the primary cost. As transfer fees become a smaller and smaller percentage of the cost, more and more often you're going to have wages you can't move. You're going to have players whose contracts are worth more than them. And then you get reverse transfer fees effectively, which is what happens a lot in North American sports. In North American sports, there are very commonly reverse transfer fees. There can never be transfer fees. They're against the rules. But there's very commonly reverse transfer fees where you send a player plus money to cover some of their salary.
Right. One could imagine in Serie A in which you were Juventus and you wanted to get rid of Cristiano Ronaldo and say, I don't know, Manchester United need a striker for a year, and that they didn't want to pay Ronaldo's full wages, but maybe they would for a year if Juventus included a prospect, right, in a transfer. Mm-hmm. Now, it doesn't seem like we're there yet in terms of the market working that way. But I don't think we're too far away from getting there.
Exactly. There is an economic logic that I think applies. And it can take a lot of time for norms to develop and change. I think that we are seeing those norms changing very slowly over time in football. I think the other thing that comes up here is the logic for players gets different at other levels. Like when you're talking about Kylian Mbappe can just do whatever he wants. Kylian Mbappe can say, no, I'm leaving, and PSG is just going to play Kylian Mbappe every week. For other players, that idea that they might leave, there are norms that you don't do that. And there are expectations from coaches that their players won't do that their players will want to be there. And so, there's pressure that clubs can put on players. It'll be interesting to see if anybody actually does it, putting pressure on players around playing time, around sitting out. When Rabiot tried to leave PSG a couple times, he got threatened.
It happens all the time at youth levels, right? Like, it happens all the time at youth levels where you're trying to keep these players who are developing and young under your control, and so you're sort of keeping them from first team minutes until they sign contract extensions. I mean, to say nothing of the even more scummier practices of no, you have to have this agent and not that agent kind of, or we won't play you kind of stuff. But that stuff does recede to some degree, as you get into a more professional setting, and you get more no, it's fine, your agent can go find you a transfer if you want to leave, which is sure, but the question is, will that tip over into, well, no, I don't want to leave, I just don't want to sign a contract, I just want to run my contract down. I'm happy to play, and if you don't want to play me, that's fine, but I'm not trying to find a transfer move. I'm not trying to get you money so that I can, sign a new contract 2 years before my contract is up.
Yeah, and exactly how that balances out, how those norms are still, to what degree those norms are still policed and those expectations are still made by managers and clubs, it has a lot to do with how many players try to push on it. If one player tries to push on it, they can be pushed back. If 4 of your starters are nah, I'm running my contract down, you're effed if you don't play them. And then numbers become a big issue.
But then the other thing is just it may just be when everybody has transfer money again in a year or whatever that this becomes less of an issue, because players just get sold a lot more because there are rich clubs that come in with good offers, and then they the players are not. It turns out that if your options are extend for a 10% increase or not, that's a lot different than accept a transfer for a 30% increase or not, even though if you run it down, you may be looking at significantly more than a 30% increase. And like that may just sort of stem the tide of all of this.
Yeah, I really don't have a read on it, and I think that, like, you know, that's the to me, my main takeaway here is that we are making a lot of sort of guesses and extrapolations from likely understandings, from hypothesized understandings of team finances, but we're just not there. And a lot of different things could be possible depending on different... weirdly, I have a better handle on Manchester City's finances than almost any of the clubs that, like, you know, are really revenue constrained.
Well, you know, that's what happens when you get leaked.
Yeah. All right. So we will be back talking about Serie A for Patreon subscribers. Probably have some players to talk about on the Moussa Dembele level. And maybe next week we'll talk about teams who should be worried, but we'll see. 3 weeks is still early.
All right. Cheers, y'all.
Cheers.